Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in today for our GBTA Canada Town Hall. And welcome to summer officially. It may be, I think, our second COVID summer, but it's summer nonetheless, so something to celebrate there. My name is Nancy Tudorosh, and for those who are joining new, I'm the Regional Vice President for GBTA here in Canada, and pleased to host our summer version of our Town Hall. So we do have an absolute ton of information to share with you today, and I'm going to give you a heads up that this session may actually be a little bit longer than the anticipated 60 minutes because we have so much fantastic info with our speakers to share with you. So if you can hang in there with us, I promise it'll be extremely relevant for you and well worth your time today. We will also, as you know, be recording it. So in the event that you can't join in for the remainder of the session, if we do run over, we certainly will make the recordings available. And as far as our agenda goes, like I said, lots of information. I have several very important GBTA Canada changes that I will be sharing with you in GBTA updates. Then we will move into our featured speakers today. So we have Jennifer Taylor from TIAC, who will be discussing some important campaign initiatives that TIAC has been putting forward with respect to our US-Canada border reopening and some other key initiatives that they've been working on this year. And from there, we will have Dr. Tammy McKnight, WestJet's Chief Medical Officer, who will share really interesting information and medical perspectives on Canada and COVID, where we're at, where we are going with vaccines, and what's important to know as we continue to move through and beyond this pandemic. So as always, before we get into the program, let's run through a few housekeeping items for today. This session, as I mentioned, will certainly be recorded and it will be available on our website along with a copy of the PowerPoint deck as a resource document for everyone. We'll also be sending that out to everybody following the call in the next day or so. And on site, we have behind the Zoom curtain, Swati Etrick with GBTA Canada, who will be available for any assistance needed. If you want to email her at setrick@gbta.org, her email's on the screen here. And in case there are any issues, questions, or concerns that come up throughout the presentation technically. And as far as questions for our speakers, we do have a lot of content to get through today. So time permitting, we will endeavor to answer those questions. So you can type your questions into the Q&A box here in Zoom. And if we can't get to them today, we'll try and follow up with you directly if there's any important questions that we don't cover in the topics. So, I mean, I can't believe we're nearing the end of June and Canada Day is actually next week. So lots and lots has been going on. It's been an absolute whirlwind in our country, in our globe, in our lives, in our industry, and also here at GBTA. So much so that, you know, you can't keep track of it all. It almost gives you whiplash with all the activity going on. And we've had a lot going on just recently that I want to share some important information with you on, because just this past month of May, we were extremely excited to bring a brand new educational offering to our global community. The Ready Safe Travel training program that GBTA launched and introduced was an industry-wide program that we ran virtually every Wednesday for a 4-week duration throughout the month of May. And the purpose of this program really was to unite and educate and engage all levels of our business travel industry, both buyers and suppliers alike, with very specific content that delivered essential information to help transition business travel and meetings and its practices beyond this pandemic. So the cool thing was we had nearly 700 global participants, of which 600 successfully completed the program and became Ready Safe Travel specialists. So lots and lots of engagement worldwide. And the program itself took everyone through about 10.5 hours of training over the 4-week duration, and involved all of GBTA's regions from the US, Europe, LATAM, and of course, right here in Canada. And you know what? I am super impressed. We had over 200 Canadians of that total 700. 200 were Canadians that took the Ready Safe Travel training program. So awesome showing for Canada. Way to go. Way to go, everybody. Now, the learning objectives in this particular program were designed around prior experiences and principles and emerging tools, government regulations, lots of really important information that will help everybody progress through and beyond this pandemic. So for those who did successfully complete the program, and of course the knowledge check quizzes that were issued each week following the program, they became certified as Ready Safe Travel specialists. And they received a digital certificate, a digital badge, and so much more. And it's quite fascinating actually to see how much social media has been shared around those who had this wonderful accomplishment of becoming Ready Safe Travel specialists. Lots of people sharing their certificates, their badges in their professional networks. So great to see that. It's a fantastic motivation for our industry. So to provide you at a glance, just a quick highlight of all of the wonderful Canadians that are now Ready Safe Travel specialists. You can see throughout the list here, so many people certainly took part in the program. So big round of applause to all of our great Canadians. Now, we could not be more pleased from the survey results globally from this program itself. It really did get a super big thumbs up. But more importantly, I'm particularly impressed with that very last stat here. It says that 82% said that by having a Ready Safe Travel certification will help them increase their internal perception of their level of knowledge within their organization. That is outstanding. In fact, there was so much positive feedback that we received, coupled with just a tremendous amount of individuals and companies that reached out to us that wanted to take the program, but were just not available during the month of May due to other commitments or conflicts for the timing. So it really prompted us at GBTA to think about what is that next phase? What can we do to continue the Ready Safe Travel training program? So with that, I'm really pleased to let you know that we are actually repackaging the training program, the video content, the PowerPoint slides, the resources, the quizzes, and putting it into a self-paced training program that will be available to take on demand, on your own time, on your own pace throughout the rest of 2021. This way, you, your colleagues, your peers, they too can become Ready Safe Travel specialists and be part of this movement to help safely restore business travel and meetings, uniting our global industry through education and through knowledge. So very important. Now, the program itself will be launched later in July, and it will be at the registration rates, very affordably priced to help our individuals, professionals within the industry take part in this program at $100 for GBTA members and $125 for non-members. We also heard from so many companies that were very interested to have their teams take part in the program. Tons of buyers reached out and said that there's an appetite to have more individuals, administrative assistants, executive assistants, professionals within their procurement departments, events departments take part in the program, and of course suppliers wanting to have more access for their sales teams to be involved. So what we decided to also do was offer a corporate bundle of 10 or more registrations at an amazing discounted rate of $50 per person for 10 or more. So if you're interested to learn more about the self-paced Ready Safe Travel training program, how you and your company can become involved and become Ready Safe Travel specialists, you can email us at globalevents@gbta.org, or of course, feel free to reach out to me directly. And more information will be released as we progress through the month of July. Now, I'd like to highlight a few upcoming important initiatives for GBTA that are coming up just around the corner. Actually, next week for GBTA Canada, we will be holding our very last regional direct talk buyer-only call of the summer months, and that'll take place on June 29th. Okay, so if you haven't registered, certainly you can find this information on our website for the travel buyers only. It's a buyer-only call, and we will be able to add you to the call for the 29th. And then on July the 20th, we have our GBTA Mid-Year Virtual Summit, which will be pretty much a full day of education content, but it will be combined with our annual business meeting. And it's a really important event to consider attending, because not only will we have educational content around topics such as, you know, the digital health passport debate and hybrid versus face-to-face meeting solutions, you know, things along those lines, but we're also going to be sharing critically important updates on the business of GBTA, okay, along with the announcement of our board of directors election results, which we have voting open right now, and it'll close on July the 19th. So lots of information will be shared that day on our July 20th event, and more information can be secured on our website at gbta.org. So I'd like to just pivot a little bit and talk about the GBTA Board of Directors elections and some critical changes that actually recently occurred with our GBTA bylaws. And as you all know, GBTA is a member-based association, and it's critical that our members have a voice and that our members are heard. So as you may know, GBTA members believed that the association needed to update its bylaws to reflect a growing global membership and to prepare the association for our future. So there was an international bylaw review committee that was formed, and after months of preparation, there were 2 sets of member-approved bylaw changes that were sent to the membership to vote on. So I'd like to just highlight a couple of those here for you. So the first set of the bylaws that passed made sure that we allowed for all active GBTA members, so allies who are suppliers and directs who are buyers, to vote on bylaw changes. It also recategorized the indirect membership to better define member categories and create affiliate members. And lastly, it shortened the number of days required by candidates to file for office and make it easier for members of the association to also qualify for office positions. Now, the second set of bylaws that passed allowed for a change to the composition of the overall board of directors. And part of this change was the addition of 2 regional seats. So one for Canada, which we're thrilled to see, and one for Europe, okay? Now, this ensures there is really, truly regional representation that exists on the global board of directors. Changes were also made to the specific board positions to be recategorized along with the length of term for the board of directors. And lastly, it was passed that all active GBTA members be allowed to vote for key board appointments. So essentially, these key bylaw amendments will help us to ensure a path forward for a successful future for GBTA. Now, we do have an election that is active right now, and I implore all GBTA members to get out and vote. Part of the bylaw changes did allow for all GBTA active members to be able to vote for any one of the elected positions available. So you know what, your vote, it really does count, okay? And it is truly a monumental time for us because we have a lot of positions that are coming up for election. So right now you can help decide who will be the new president, vice president, regional directors for Canada and Europe, the various directors at large. There's 8 seats on the board of directors, as you can see here, that are up for elections. And there are numerous candidates that are putting in a ton of hard work and time to run for these positions. So do take the time to review their platform statements, reach out to candidates that are running, and if you have any questions, and certainly make sure GBTA members get out and vote, because your vote really does matter. And if there's any information that's required, we've got the link here, the gbta.org/elections-2021, that is available for you to access, so you can find out all of the pertinent information. Our voting began this Monday on June 21st and will close on Monday, July 19th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. The results of the election will be announced during that GBTA annual business meeting I told you about that'll take place on Tuesday, July 20th. So as always, if you have any questions at all or are not sure if you're an active GBTA member or have concerns around how to vote, or you can't find your email link, etc., we've got some information here that and links that you can email or phone to help find out what information you're missing and how you can stay involved and be present and active to vote. So get out there and vote. And certainly I implore our Canadians to get out there. This is important. Again, your vote matters. All right, now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about another significant change that's coming to GBTA Canada. And I think, you know, COVID, this is the time of change, right? So we've had so many twists and turns over this past year and a half. And, you know, COVID's definitely made planning and looking to the future really challenging. But we're getting good at pivoting. That's one thing. And we're listening to the signs and we're listening to the people and we're keeping in touch with what's important to you. So all of the extended lockdowns here in Canada, the changing restrictions and the uncertainty around indoor mass gathering sizes have made our plans for the fall no longer possible for GBTA Canada. And as a result, and after consultation, like I said, with a wide variety of our Canadian members, travel partners, suppliers, buyers, we've made a very important decision to pivot again. So we've decided that we are going to move our GBTA Canada conference that was to take place in Toronto from September to March of 22, okay? This will take place during a time where we feel confident that restrictions will be mostly behind us and we can safely gather, you know, 400, 500, 600 people all together to meet in person for our national conference. We're very pleased that the Sheraton Center Hotel will also continue to be our host hotel, and they're excited to welcome our Canadian business travel and meetings industry for what will be, I'm certain, the most anticipated Canadian conference of GBTA Canada's history. And at that time in 2022, it'll be our 18th year for GBTA Canada. So a monumental conference is looming on the horizon, okay? So more information will certainly come about the conference and what changes will be involved there. But don't worry, because we do have plans for this year, for 2021. It's extremely important for us at GBTA Canada to continue to engage our industry this year. So we wanted to do something that is safe, it is appropriate, it's affordable, it's meaningful, and you know what? Easy to attend. So we are committed to be your association that can provide you with education, networking, knowledge, and help restore our industry, evolve business practices, and be that constant support to help stabilize Canadian business travel and meetings. So here was what we're going to do. GBTA Canada is going on a cross-country roadshow in the second half of October of 2021, second half this year of October, with a full day of professional development workshops that we will bring to the key cities of Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and Montreal as our GBTA Canada Ready Safe Travel workshop series. So we're working on all the details of this program right now and locking in our host hotel venues and the dates. So stay tuned on this exciting opportunity. We will have more information in the next couple of weeks, and we're really looking forward to meet in person this fall in a smaller, more intimate, and appropriately sized gathering space, safely, of course, in each of the key cities across Canada. So, I mean, it's been a long time, right, since we've all met in person, really has. And we want to make sure that you feel confident and comfortable while knowing that you can rely on us on GBTA Canada to hold a day of professional development that is important to your future, important to your professional development, and something that is easy for you to make it out to in your hometown or a town that's near you. So, like I said, the details will be released in the next couple of weeks, but I wanted you to hear this first from me today. As all throughout COVID, this year and a half, we have been working so hard at GBTA Canada to provide you the best opportunities to stay in the know, to evolve with the times, to understand the industry, the changes, and to still be part of our Canadian business travel community. So my commitment, our commitment, is that we will get back to meeting. We will get back to traveling, and GBTA Canada is here to lead the way and deliver that to you in each one of these cities this fall. So lots of excitement there. Now, there's also some really positive things that are happening, and certainly, again, a lot of change that has taken place just very, very recently. Not only are we seeing more openings across Canada in the various provinces, which is so welcomed, but we're also seeing optimism among our member results in our GBTA COVID impact polls that we've been releasing. So our most recent poll that was dated June 17th does show that domestic travel activity is certainly trending upwards across the globe, and confidence is growing among businesses getting back to travel again. So you can access this full report and data on our website. It's also included in the link here in this resource deck when you get it. So take a look at it. I encourage you to see the results, look at what's happening, what's trending around the world. Now, there's also some exciting movement that's happening around international borders and from an international perspective as well. And GBTA has been on the forefront in the EU and in the US to compel lawmakers and governments of the necessary coordinated efforts and plan needed to reopen international borders. So we're having these conversations, we're having the dialogue, and things are starting to look like they're moving ahead very positively. And here in Canada, GBTA Canada is part of the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable initiative, and we've partnered with and collaborated with not only with the all of the members that are part of that initiative, but also with all of the major travel sector related associations here in our country to turn up the heat on the Canadian government at this point, right? And while our government did release some, sort of disappointing news last week around the extension of the border closures, there was positive movement this week on the lifting of the quarantine requirements for fully vaccinated Canadians that was announced on Monday, right? So the Canadian government, effective July 5th, very exciting for fully vaccinated Canadians and permanent residents will no longer have to quarantine or complete the 8-day COVID test. So I've included here the link to the press release that was sent out by the government. So you can have all of the access to the details of this particular new announcement. So positivity is certainly, coming along. Now, I mentioned earlier that we've had the wonderful pleasure of working with all of these tremendous sector associations in the travel space here in Canada. And one such industry partnership that GBTA Canada has is with TIAC, the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. And with this association, we are super pleased to support TIAC's Open the US-Canada Border campaign. And here to talk about what TIAC is doing and how you and your companies can get involved in this campaign is TIAC's Vice President of Business Development, Jennifer Taylor. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Jennifer, to give us an update on what's going on from your perspective.
Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate that. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I'm part of this town hall. As Nancy said, I'm Jen Taylor, Vice President of Business Development and Member Relations with the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, which we commonly call TIAC. So we're happy to be here and give you a quick overview. But before we start, I would like to first take the moment to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home from coast to coast to coast. We extend our respect to them for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Nancy, if you could please advance the slide. Thank you. For those of you who do not know, TIAC is the national voice for the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, national voice for the tourism industry in Canada. We take action on behalf of the Canadian tourism businesses, advocating, promoting, and supporting policies, programs, and activities that will benefit the sector's growth and development. It's our privilege and responsibility to represent the full suite of sectors that make up Canada's visitor economy. Tourism is more than restaurants, hotels, and airplanes. It encompasses festivals, events, attractions, outdoor experiences like camping, fishing, and hiking, cruise, and of course, business travel, meetings, and conferences. Canada's travel and tourism industry is a powerful economic driver. If you could advance to the next slide. Nancy? Thank you. Prior to COVID-19, our industry generated $105 billion a year in economic activity and employed 1.8 million Canadians and was growing. Through COVID, tourism was the first hit, hardest hit, and will be the last to recover. The COVID-19 pandemic has created a crisis in Canada's tourism and travel industry unlike anything we've seen before. The impact of COVID on our industry was greater than that of SARS, the 2008 economic crisis, and 9/11 combined. The industry has lost over 500,000 workers, disproportionately impacting youth and minority populations. We are a people business, and public health restrictions have, of course, affected us significantly. Many of our businesses cannot pivot the way other businesses can, such as going to online or curbside pickup service. Advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. At the onset of the pandemic, TIAC put together a COVID-19 recovery committee who has informed our recommendations over the past 15 months. The committee includes representatives from all sectors of the tourism economy from across Canada and is led by our president and CEO, Beth Potter, who sends her regrets for not being able to participate in this town hall. For the past 15 months, we have been elevating the issues impacting our industry and meeting with federal officials, including MPs and senators, to share stories of industry challenges and needs. We have been pushing for sector-specific support and relief programs. After the budget announcement in April, please advance to the next slide, Nancy. Thank you. TIAC has been facilitating conversations with the government to understand the rollout of the proposed programs. We are focused on providing input and feedback, ensuring that the needs of the tourism industry are met through these programs. And next slide, please. Advocating on behalf of employees and businesses is TIAC's priority, but we are also looking ahead and are committed to championing the recovery of the industry. And on to the next slide. Thank you. Earlier this month, TIAC launched a campaign calling on the federal government to reopen the Canada-US border. Our campaign focuses on getting Canadian decision makers to acknowledge the urgent need and to commit to a date to open the border before another summer tourism season is lost. I'm pleased to share a little clip of our recent activity.
Well, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and President Joe Biden have not yet scheduled to meet on the sidelines of the G7 summit. There was an expectation they would to discuss the U.S.-Canada border, which has been closed for non-essential travel for 15 months.
So prior to the pandemic, the industry was a $105 billion a year industry. We employed close to 2 million people. Our industry is less than half that now. It has been devastated. We don't want to lose a second summer, so we need to get the borders open so that we can get visitation coming back across the border and revitalizing Canadian communities from coast to coast to coast.
We've been working behind the scenes with government officials for the past 15 months, and now we're seeing the recent scientific reports and the expert panel report as evidence that now is the time to be transparent with a phased reopening approach.
We're asking the federal government, at the time that they're considering stopping the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy for these businesses, that at the same time we need to give them a clue, a better understanding of when that border will open.
That element of business travel is so vital and is at the heart of why we're so passionate about getting the U.S. border open. That is our biggest market, and that is our only path to recovery.
Businesses are wanting to be able to plan for the summer, and so we're asking government to work collaboratively at all levels and give industry a date to work towards. The industry is ready to welcome international travelers back, so that's what we're waiting for.
Nancy. Through this campaign, we have garnered over 300 distinct media mentions across Canada and the US, and we continue to monitor the pressure and the progress. We are keeping abreast of what's happening on Parliament Hill, so when the opportunity presents itself, we can leverage the moment and insert our foot in the door. The federal government set conditions for lifting restrictions at the Canada-US border, including a target of 75% of total population with a first dose and 20% with 2 doses before government lifts border restrictions. We hit those targets this past weekend, but not before the federal government once again extended the border closure to July 21st. With the federal government's own imposed targets met, we will start advocating for fluidity in the border closure date of July 21st based on fact and science. We'll also take the opportunity to remind the government that their decision to lift most international travel restrictions for Canadians on July 5th will essentially reactivate our travel deficit, once again negatively impacting the sector and Canada's economy. As other countries start welcoming travelers, Canada has fallen behind. We must prepare to open the border quickly and safely, and in turn, restart our visitor economy. Without question, now is the time for the federal government to put in place an evidence-based plan to reopen the border and restart travel with a target date. Canadian tourism operators and businesses need to have the ability to plan. We need time to market, rebook, rehire, retrain, restock, and retool. Our operators will be ready to welcome visitors, but as you know, it's not as simple as flicking on a switch. Further on this effort, TAG President and CEO took part in press conferences earlier this week with the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable, calling for a comprehensive national reopening plan to lift border restriction, announcing criteria for opening the Canada-US border, and to implement a vaccine certification program to allow entry for international travel. TAG is also looking to lead the way in changing the current narrative on behalf of the sector. We need public confidence to understand that when restrictions are lifted, our businesses are prepared to offer experiences following all the necessary health and hygiene protocols. We've also been facilitating conversations with Canadian and US government, but we've also at the global table through World Travel and Tourism Council to ensure Canada is part of the seamless traveler experience for people that are moving around the world as we recover from the pandemic. Though domestic travel will be a critical first step in recovery, we need to ensure Canada keeps its competitive global position as a tourism destination. So our work is far from over, and we will continue to fight for the industry, but we can't do it alone. We need your engagement and help to elevate the urgency and the need to have the Canada-US border open. So please visit Tourism Counts and take action. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send them to me directly or to the TIAC team. And thank you again, and back to you, Nancy.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you, of course, to you and Beth and the whole TIAC team for all that you're doing to help, rally the industry, rally the support, and help to get that message forward. So very important. And again, I reiterate that we do have on our GBTA Canada website, we are supporting TIAC and the Open Canada-US Border Initiative. And you can find the link to where you too can submit a letter to your MP. We will include that link directly in our follow-up email to everyone, so you can take action, circulate that in your networks and your companies and your professional and personal overall network. So we appreciate the support there. And again, thank you so much, Jen, to you for being here today. All right, now we're going to move on to the medical perspective and what are we dealing with today and what is to come with Canada as we move through and beyond COVID. So I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Tammy McKnight, who is new in her role as Chief Medical Officer with WestJet. And Dr. McKnight combines her experience as an occupational medicine physician and expertise in civil aviation medicine to her new role and to our Canadian business travel industry today. So Dr. McKnight, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Nancy, for having me today. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to chat with your group a little bit on COVID, where we are today and where I hope to see us go in the next few weeks. So I've got a lot of slides here we're going to move through fairly quickly. So if you want to just move to the next slide, Nancy, and give you a little bit of an overview of where we're going. What I'm going to do is quickly give an update of where we are today in Canada and the world with regards to COVID. I wouldn't be a physician if I didn't take the opportunity to talk about vaccination during a pandemic. So I'm going to do a quick review of our vaccines that are available and how they work, and then move on to talking about herd immunity and our threats to it, quickly touch on airline travel and COVID, and then talk about mental health implications of the pandemic and what we think will happen with reopening. So just to review where we are today in Canada with cases, to date, this data was taken from Sunday, but we have about 1.4 million cases with 26,000 total deaths. That equates to about a 2% overall mortality rate that we've seen in Canada. As you can see by the graph there, we are seeing that trending downward in our third wave with only about 12,000 cases active to date. Next slide, when we can compare to what's going on in the rest of the world, recognizing that that total case number is grossly underestimated at 180 million roughly, largely in part to reduce testing capacity in some of the poorer countries in the world. We do have just under 4 million deaths, and today about 11.5 million active cases, which again is showing that nice downward trend as we make our way out of hopefully the third and last wave of the pandemic. Next slide, please. So as Nancy mentioned, I'm just going to touch quickly on the impacts of travel. We have lost huge amounts of employment through our travel and tourism sector as well, billions of dollars to the economy here in Canada, as well as knowing that, as Jennifer had said, the hardest hit industry and probably the slowest one to recover. Next slide. I stole this next slide from Destination Canada, and it really just is to reiterate airline travel. As of the pandemic last year, we had a 91% decline in revenues in our airline industry. And although we're seeing things slowly recover, it's taking its time and will take a long time to get back to 2019 levels. Next slide, please. So, but with vaccination, this is where our hope comes. And really, when we look back on this pandemic one day and look for the good news stories, this is really where it's going to be at. We have seen unprecedented levels of cooperation between nations when it comes to sharing of information around COVID and around vaccination. And really what the scientists that have been working on vaccination have done is nothing short of absolutely phenomenal, that they were able to bring not only vaccines to the market within the year, but vaccines with the quality and safety and efficacy that they have. It's been unheard of. Previously it's taken years and years to bring a new vaccine to market. And we've seen unprecedented speed in bringing multiple high quality vaccines to the market in such a short period of time. As you can see now, I'm sure most of you are aware, Canada is now leading the way in terms of countries with first doses. We're now at about that 70% mark across the country and individuals that have had first doses. The government was a little slow to get started with procurement of vaccination, but really as it's come in, the provinces have done a phenomenal job of getting it into the arms of Canadians. So as you can see, that quick rise up to that first dose level. Next slide. We do have a shortage or slower ability to get that second dose in. You see Canada had gone to that delaying the second dose from 4 weeks for most vaccinations to 12 to 16 weeks, a strategy that we've seen other countries, the United Kingdom, do as well. But we are edging up now with nearly 20% of the population with their second doses. And there is some variation across the country, but overall very, very close to that 20%, which is very, very promising. Next slide. I wanted to talk very quickly about COVID-19, what it is, and how it spreads, just so we can talk a little bit about how the vaccines work. So I think most of us have seen kind of these sneeze slides where you see that spray of droplets into the air around you. So those big droplets are really what we thought drove infections early in the pandemic. These large droplets are the ones that come down quickly onto surfaces. You touch the surface, touch your eyes, touch your mouth, and get infected. So that's that droplet transmission that we've seen so much. And part of the reason why that 6-foot rule for physical distancing came into place, because those droplets don't tend to spread much beyond a couple of feet. You see those smaller particles in the distance now. We're starting to have some recognition from both the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control, that aerosolization of those small particles may now be possible for spreading the virus. And that's where you get that close to that small particle, inhale it through your mouth and nose, and potentially get ill. Once the virus makes its way into the body, it does attach to the cell membrane through those spike proteins, those dark red appendages that are off the COVID virus, and through that spike protein are able to inject their genetic material inside cells. Viruses are different than all other predatory things that we see, from bacteria to protozoal infections, in that they can't survive without having a host cell. So if a virus is on a surface for a period of time, it eventually dies because it can't replicate. It needs to act as that parasite, injecting that genetic material into the cell. It takes over your cell's machinery, replicates multiple times, and then spreads and puts out new virus into the bloodstream. Next slide. How we protect ourselves from it is two different parts of our immune system. So we have our innate immune system, that's the one we're born with. It's very basic. It has those physical barriers. So your skin, your mucous membranes that protect you from getting that virus inside. The chemical barriers, saliva, stomach acid, mucus, those things that can also help prevent viral transmission. But the one thing that you've probably heard a lot about is the white blood cells. So within our innate immune system, we have phagocytes, macrophages, natural killer cells. These are just some cells. Picture them like Pac-Man. They patrol around the bloodstream. They see something that's not supposed to be there. They grab onto it, eat it up, destroy it, and spit it out. So they work very quickly, but they're highly nonspecific. They don't target any one thing in particular, and they have zero memory. So if you had an E. coli bacteria that was in your system today that the system was able to clear out before it led to an infection, there's no guarantee that it would respond in the same way tomorrow, which is different than our adaptive immune system. So basically our innate immune system tries to protect us from getting an infection. Next slide. Our adaptive immune system, on the other hand, is much more sophisticated. So what happens is when you get a protein like a bacteria or a virus in your bloodstream that's not supposed to be there, some of the cells in our system will grab onto it, like a dendritic cell, and drag it back to your lymph nodes. And once it's there, it'll wake up your B cells and your T cells, which are part of this adaptive immune system. The B cells are those cells that are really important when we talk about vaccination, because what they do is they'll pour out antibodies. And then the antibodies will grab onto parts of the virus and either neutralize it so it can't get into our cells to cause that replication, or it'll tag it to be destroyed by other cells like our monocytes or our phagocytes that we talked about previously. The important part about this system, though, is that both our B cells and T cells have memory. So if they see a bacteria or a virus one time, when that virus tries to come back a second time, they're able to pour out those antibodies very, very quickly to try and neutralize the viruses before they're able to cause infection. And this is the part of our immune system where vaccines work. So essentially what a vaccine does is it mimics infection by giving our system a preview or a little snippet of what that virus looks like, either by giving it parts of the virus or a whole virus that's either weakened or dead. Usually we do that either thermally or chemically. And what it does is when our immune system sees that, our B cells and T cells will produce some of that immune response, those antibodies we talked about, but more importantly, they'll create a memory of it. So the next time it comes, we're able to respond very, very quickly and hopefully prevent infection. And that's what vaccines do. Next slide. So we have the three basic types of vaccines that are on the market here in Canada today, or will be coming to the market very quickly. So the protein-based vaccine is the Novavax that is in front of Health Canada now for review. And basically it just takes spike proteins that are made actually in moths that are then purified and then injected as a vaccine into the system so that antibody production can begin. The second type is the viral vector. So that's our AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And basically what it does is it genetically alters an adenovirus to basically put that protein gene, the spike protein gene, into that adenovirus that then turns our cells on to make that spike protein in our own body and then presents it to the immune system. And finally, the mRNA, the one that everybody's excited about, this new technology, the Pfizer and Moderna, which just injects mRNA right into our system. And mRNA is that recipe that allows our system to make spike protein. So no extra steps, straight mRNA that makes the spike protein quickly degraded in the body and then spit out. And then from that spike protein, we're able to mount that immune response. Next slide. So again, the vaccines that are made here today, you can see the two that are on the market, the mRNAs, the Pfizer and Moderna, as well as the viral vectors, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. And we are believing that we'll see the Novavax on the market here too very soon in the next coming weeks to months. Next slide. Here's really the story, though, of these vaccines is really how good these vaccines are. So this is the study data that was presented to Health Canada from the vaccines. But I think having the comparison of what a normal vaccine would do to these vaccines is really gives that big understanding. So in an average flu season, we would be pretty happy with a vaccine that was 50 to 60% effective. So when you see numbers like 94 or 95% effective with the Pfizer or Moderna, that is just phenomenal. When you look at AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, there's that efficacy number seems to be a lot lower with that 62 to 66%. But really what I think is important to understand here is that you're not comparing apples to apples when you're looking at these two numbers. The Moderna and Pfizer were done, the clinical trials that were done at a period of time when there was lower levels of COVID active in the community compared to when AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson were running their trials. And the other thing is Pfizer and Moderna, basically did one thing. They had a standard dose and a standard dosing interval. They got the numbers right. The trials were productive. They got those numbers. They were very efficacious. AstraZeneca, on the other hand, had 4 or 5 different arms in their trial where they had different dosing regimens that they were giving to individuals. And some of them had lower efficacy. Some of them had very high efficacy, up around that 90%. So those are the doses that we're actually giving to individuals. But when they combined the data together, you got those lower numbers of 62%. Really, though, what matters is that efficacy against severe illness, where you see in the trial data, all of these vaccines were highly effective, 100% across the board at preventing severe illness. In real world data, we're seeing the Pfizer and Moderna is probably closer to 90% effective, the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca probably between 80 and 90%, and the Johnson & Johnson closer to 80%. But really, really fantastic vaccines. And even with the variants of concern that we're seeing, when you get the 2 doses in, we're still seeing those high rates of efficacy against COVID. Next slide, please. And then it begs the question, well, how safe are they? So the big piece about this is that all these vaccines have undergone rigorous testing for both safety and efficacy. There was no corners cut anywhere in the approval of these vaccines. What was done to get them to market quickly was, one is the collaboration that I mentioned among scientists around the world of sharing data, the clinical trials, the phases that were ran, instead of running them and separating them by periods of time, they were run in an overlapping fashion. And then agencies like Health Canada, rather than working 8 to 4 Monday to Friday, were working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week to review the data and make sure that it was safe to put out to individuals in Canada. We do have a rigorous post-marketing surveillance system that remains in place. In Canada, it is actually a legal requirement for a physician to report an adverse effect to a vaccine. So we all do it if we see it. To date, this is data that I took from a Sunday as well, 28 million doses given, about 7,500 reports of adverse effects, and of those, about 1,500 were considered serious. So less than 0.006% of all doses. Of course, anybody who's had the vaccine to date knows that the most common side effects are pain and swelling, redness at the injection site, fever, chills, sometimes some upset stomach and diarrhea, but most are gone within 48 hours. Next slide. Let's talk a minute about some of the more concerning side effects that come with some of the vaccines. So the vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia, the VIT or VPIT, as it's been talked about in the media, is associated with the AstraZeneca vaccine. And we've seen some cases of it in the United States with the Johnson & Johnson as well. It's an illness where you get a large clot formation with bleeding at the same time. And it obviously is a very significant side effect that can occur in the 1 to 34 days after the vaccine. To date in Canada, we've had 54 cases with 6 deaths. This is something that we can see very similar illness with some other medications or other illnesses. So once our doctors in the emergency rooms started recognizing it, there is some treatment that is available. So we've seen that mortality rate drop with it. But we do know that about 1 in 55,000 doses on the high end will have a risk of it, and about 1 in 600,000 with the second dose. And just to put that into perspective, we know about 1 in 2,000 women who take birth control pills will get a clot. Obviously not necessarily as significant as VIT, but clotting nonetheless. And we know with COVID, even the mild cases in the community carry a risk of about 1% risk of getting a clot. When you're hospitalized, that jumps to about 5%. And our ICU patients is anywhere from 20 to 30%. So we do know that clotting is a significant problem that does occur with COVID infection. And I thought I'd also talk quickly about myocarditis, because it's definitely making the news in the United States mostly, where we're seeing some concerns about myocarditis in our teenage population, mostly boys, after getting the Pfizer vaccine delivered. In Canada, from reports, we've had 53 cases reported, about 40 of them with Pfizer. But to date, there's no clear association with the vaccine. And that's because myocarditis or pericarditis, that inflammation of the heart sac, is a very common thing that we do see in the emergency room, common in the days following viral infections. So we will continue to monitor that for sure to see if there's any association. But to date, with the data we've seen in Canada, Health Canada has yet to say that there is a clear association or a safety signal associated with it. Next slide, please. So mixing and matching vaccines, probably the most common question that I get asked now from WestJetters. We've had 2 studies out of the United Kingdom, and one from the UK and one from Spain, that have shown that mixing and matching vaccines is very safe to do and does seem to produce huge amounts of antibodies, which we hope will translate into high levels of efficacy as well. The studies that they did mix AstraZeneca with Pfizer and had about a 2% adverse effect rate that was rated by the individuals as serious. That doesn't mean hospitalization, it just means they felt unwell. And we have seen that strong immune response here, though, that we're mixing AstraZeneca with Pfizer or Moderna here in Canada, where people are complaining about that sore arm and a little bit achy and chills following. There is a lot of scientists that do think that we may actually get improved benefits by mixing vaccines, by having better variant coverage and maybe prolonged immunity with the combination, but only time will tell. You have seen probably this week as well in the news that mixing mRNA vaccines is now possible, mixing the Moderna and the Pfizer. And so many provinces across the country have moved to that approach now as well. Next slide. So moving on from vaccines to the pandemic, I think we've all heard this herd immunity term. I really like this little diagram that I stole off the internet to show how herd immunity is achieved. And essentially what happens with herd immunity, as I mentioned earlier, that viruses can't replicate if they don't have a host. So if we get enough of that population that's immunized against COVID-19, then the viruses have nowhere to go when those chains of infection are broken. So what happens in herd immunity is that when we get to that critical mass of individuals that have been vaccinated or have natural immunity from having caught the virus, which we think is going to be somewhere between 70 and 80%, what happens then is the whole population benefits from the percentage of the population that is immunized. So what we're hoping now is those that have chosen not to vaccinate or can't vaccinate for medical reasons, or those that are young will eventually gain protection from the adult population and those over 12 that have been vaccinated. Next slide. Though there are still some threats to herd immunity, and I think that it's worthwhile talking about them a little bit so that can understand why some of this stuff is constantly in the news. So virus mutation and variant development very much is a threat to herd immunity. We know that viruses mutate, it's what they do. It's no surprise that variants are developing because that's just the typical pattern of what happens. But what we're seeing now is some of these variants that are, becoming more pathological. So they are able to spread more quickly, like the Delta variant. We're seeing that it's about 30 to 60% better at spreading over the UK variant, which was more easily spread than the wild type variant. And it's about 2.8 times, has about a 2.8 times higher rate of hospitalization. So what we're seeing is some of these ones are coming out now. You'll hear in the news, there's some talk about scariants, which are these ones that potentially can have vaccine escape or can get around vaccines. We haven't had any evidence that those have emerged yet. But anytime that anytime the virus continues to spread between individuals is an opportunity for variant development. So this is important when we talk about having groups or pockets of individuals that aren't vaccinated, where that virus is moving very quickly through the population. Next slide. So threat number one to herd immunity is vaccine inequity. And again, this has been in the news a lot lately and something that is really important. Because what you can see is countries like Canada have went out. Canada has more vaccine purchased per capita than any other country in the world. And what you can see is when countries have gone out and bought 2 and 3 times the doses of vaccine that they need, a lot of the poorer countries in the world have kind of been left in the dust. And as of today, only 0.9% of the population of the poorest countries in the world have received vaccine. And we have, the World Health Organization has the COVAX group that's been put together to try and help combat that. But it's interesting, even in a country like Canada, the population doesn't really support giving away our vaccine until we're all vaccinated, until the last Canadian is vaccinated. There was an Angus Reid study that was done, or poll that was done in the beginning of June, that said more than 3/4 of Canadians are not wanting to share vaccine at this point. But again, it's really important for this reason that we consider these countries, because when they do have those levels of COVID running wild, we will see more variants that come through, and potentially one that can escape the vaccines that we have made today. And we could see more and more infections rise even in vaccinated populations. Next slide. Threat number 2 is vaccine hesitancy. And there's a lot of talk about this, kind of the hot button topic, as we have a lot of competing messages on social media coming through about vaccination. And the reason why people tend to be vaccine hesitant is number one, they don't believe the risk of COVID applies to them. So this is often in our younger individuals who think it's a common cold and they won't get sick. And that may have been the truth when we had that wild type virus, where younger individuals were rarely affected. But as we're seeing in the UK now with the Delta variant, as these bugs become more and more virulent, this is applying to all individuals. So it is important that that group too get vaccinated. The second is I do not trust the information presented to me, therefore I do not believe it's safe. And now more than ever before, we've seen competing narratives, especially on social media, on the anti-vax movement. It's interesting in that 65% of the information that's presented on social media comes from 12 well-known anti-vaxxers. I think it's important to say that most of the information that they have spread has been completely unfounded in science. Just for your own knowledge, a scientific process does not include publishing studies on social media. If the study hasn't been subject to peer reviewed, it is not a valid study and equates to junk science. And that's a lot of what we've seen these groups doing. And third and final is, I don't want to vaccinate based upon religious beliefs. And that has a lot to do with fetal cells. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Next slide. Vaccine hesitancy across Canada, thankfully, has continued to drop throughout the pandemic. We saw a high at around Christmas time of those individuals that were refusing to vaccinate or who were unsure if they wanted to vaccinate. And as the pandemics wore on, we're down to about 9% of the population that does not want to receive a vaccine and only about 3% that isn't sure. And so that's about 12% of the population that is, as we would label as vaccine hesitant at this point in time. There is some variation around the country though. Alberta and Saskatchewan remain the problem childs of the country, with about 18% of us out west here saying they don't want to receive the vaccine. And our counterparts to the West, British Columbia and out in the Maritimes are really only about 10%. So it does vary across the country. This isn't unique to Canada. These are very similar statistics that we see in other countries around the world. Next slide. So just to quickly run through some of the vaccine myths that we see. Number one, researchers rushed the development of vaccine. As I mentioned earlier, they weren't fast. It just was slow previously. That's the message with that one. Number two, if you've had COVID-19, you don't need a vaccine. What we're seeing is the immunity that comes from infection with COVID-19 is probably not as long lasting as you would get from a vaccine. So at this point, we are recommending that anybody who's had COVID should get a vaccine as well. Getting the vaccine can give you COVID. Well, what we showed you earlier is you're only getting the spike protein. So you can't get sick from only the spike protein. Number four, the COVID vaccine affects fertility. Excuse me. So that again comes from one of those social media posts that said the spike protein that we're seeing and the antibodies that are produced against it are very similar to what's seen on placental tissue. So the argument was that if you get the vaccine, you're going to have antibodies to the placenta and you wouldn't be able to have babies in the future. And again, that's been proven to be totally false. There was questions about sperm count, and what we know about sperm count is it's actually lower when you have COVID infection. So nothing that's been proven with any of the vaccines. COVID vaccine can change your DNA, and of course that's not true. The vaccine doesn't mingle with our DNA. The COVID vaccine contains fetal cells and microchips. So the microchips one is an interesting one. This came when Bill Gates made a speech where he talked about digital certification, talking more about vaccine passports, but somehow it evolved into microchips and then liquid microchips, which again is totally false. The fetal cells issue is a little bit more interesting in that our mRNAs have no, no backing to fetal cells at all. There's no fetal cells used in the research, but our AstraZeneca vaccine, some of the research done early on was done using cells from a fetal, excuse me, I'm just gonna take a drink here, but was carried out using kidney cells from an aborted fetus from the 1970s. So we're thousands of generations away from that. But when you get down to it, there was fetal cells remotely in the research stage, none in the vaccines though that are on the market today. And finally, mRNA technology is new, and we don't know what's going to happen in the long term. mRNA technology is not new. It's actually been around 30 years or so. We have human trials using in both cancer and in some of the Zika virus, influenza, rabies trials that are now getting close to 10 years. And there hasn't been any adverse effects. And probably the most interesting thing with long-term effects is we have a lot of vaccine science knowledge. We've had vaccines since the 1700s, actually. And what we know about vaccine science is both the vaccine and the initial immune response are out of your system by the 6-week mark. So it is virtually unheard of to have any kind of side effects beyond 6 weeks. And science and medicine do not believe we'll see anything like that beyond the 6-week mark with these vaccines either. Next slide, please. Just quickly with the provincial reopening plans. These are very busy slides, but all I wanted to say here is that travel across the country is being welcome in most countries in step 3 and step 4. Next slide. And again, what we're seeing in some of the research that's been going out is that Canadians are planning to splurge post-COVID, and about 1 in 3 are planning to splurge on travel. There's another survey that we've seen that said about 80% of people are ready to travel once they feel that it's safe to do so. So good news on the horizon. Next slide, please. So air travel and COVID, I'm going to burn through these slides quickly because I understand that you guys have had a lot of this information before, but really what we know is that COVID transmission on flights is extremely rare. We are unaware of any onboard transmission in Canada and very few around the world. In multiple studies, both published in the Journal of the American Medical Association and some research from Harvard, have both labeled it as extremely low risk, lower risk than going to the grocery store, lower risk than going to a restaurant to eat. New slide. And again, that's because of that layered approach that you've heard so much about, from reduced touch points, masking, and really that big thing where we're seeing those HEPA filtration and rapid air exchange, as well as those enhanced cleaning methods that you've seen airlines take. And again, the big news there again is that HEPA filtration, removing 99.9% of particulate matter, including viruses, as well as that air mixing that 50% with fresh air and refreshing onboard air every 2 to 3 minutes. So we know that the air quality on board an aircraft is very similar to that of an operating room. So very safe on board our airlines, we do believe. Next slide. Lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about the mental health concerns that are coming out of the pandemic, because this is really, for anybody who's in medicine, something that we're very closely watching and very much concerned is going to be the new wave of problems that happens as we see COVID and the pandemic kind of fade into the background. So what we're seeing is 3/4 of Canadians are saying that their mental health has deteriorated throughout the pandemic. We see about half saying that it's causing them anxiety, about 36% depression. We're seeing more PTSD as people are having kind of these smaller traumas, especially our front-facing workers who have initially in the pandemic were very much concerned about their own safety or bringing this virus home to their families. And now as we move forward, a lot of these front-facing employees are the ones that have to talk to people about wearing masks and have to try and enforce government policy. And it's been very stressful for them. And these little traumas that we're seeing can add up into kind of a big trauma. So we're seeing that increased PTSD as well. Suicidal thoughts, obviously concerning when they've tripled throughout the pandemic. And depending what study you read about addiction, we're seeing anywhere from a 15 to 25% increase in addiction. And more and more Canadians are reaching out for mental health services than ever before, up anywhere in varying times in the pandemic, at least up 100%, calls to 211 at sometimes even more than 200%. Next slide. And really one of the things I wanted to highlight, this is from a group called Field Trip. It's maybe not the most scientific study that's come out to date, but I think it proves the point of what we're seeing is that Canadians are turning to unhealthy coping mechanisms from alcohol and marijuana, social media, pornography, gambling, and overeating. And I think when you talk to individuals, a lot of our friends and family will actually admit to a lot of this stuff, especially the drinking and overeating has become more predominant. Next slide. And as many of us are excited about reopening and really want to get back to things right away, there's about the same percentage of Canadians that are quite anxious about things reopening. So this study was a leisure survey that was done in May of this year that showed about 52% of our population was quite anxious, had a lot of anxiety or some anxiety about reopening. And this is a population that we can't ignore because we're seeing them not only in the general public, but definitely seeing them in our workplaces as well. And I think one of the things that we've talked about a lot is it's very important to be able to provide some comfort to this group as well as we reopen. So a lot of the things that we're seeing in the country and in individual businesses is really that prioritizing of safety. You'll see a lot of businesses advertising the things that they're doing. We're seeing a lot of enhancing of mental well-being. So you're seeing companies talk about it. We're seeing our governments pour more money into mental health services. You see the continuation of some of the public health measures, especially masking. Sorry about that. And a lot of communication about what's happening. And then again, that flexibility in either working from home or school from home, or doing your school from home. And next slide. And finally, just some of the considerations about returning to travel. As you're seeing, that full vaccination series will allow you to travel more readily, getting into countries, going into some of the social events. We've seen concerts in the United States. We've seen sporting events. We've seen things on Broadway where you need to be vaccinated to attend. Number two, prepare well ahead of time so you know what to expect when you arrive. Make sure you're aware of the travel restrictions, review testing and quarantine requirements. And a lot of the websites you're now seeing from travel agencies will include a lot of that information for you. With this one though too, especially when you're going to airports, I'm going to tell you to pack your patience when you go. We are expecting a bump in leisure travelers who haven't traveled at all throughout the pandemic, and they're going to be slow figuring out their way as they work their way through the airports. Continue public health measures. We know masking especially is going to be very important before you have both your vaccinations or as you're moving around with areas where you may have different variants. Consider your own mental health. Make sure that you're ready to do this. Make sure that you recognize and pay attention to the apprehension or anxiety that you have. And then finally, travel with confidence and enjoy the journey, because at least from the airline perspective, we're sure we can keep you safe. So thank you today for having me here, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. McKnight. And that is just a wealth of information. There are a couple questions that have come in, so I'll just take a couple minutes here to make a few comments and questions as we conclude in probably about 5 minutes time. You know, it's interesting. I'll make a comment first off. You talk about the mental health aspect, anxiety, PTSD, you know, about reopening, getting back to business, getting back to large gatherings, going back into public again for many of us, right? And that is something certainly that at GBTA Canada, we've taken well into consideration in our changing plans for the fall. We want everyone to be comfortable because there is going to be that transitionary period. And so just to draw some synergies there, by us holding our road show across Canada in smaller events in, you know, in Vancouver and Calgary, Toronto and Montreal, that will help everyone sort of ease back in so that when we are ready, we can come back in larger gatherings. I will ask two questions here that have come up. One is around vaccines. There's been some talk around booster shots for a third shot or a booster, depending on which vaccine you had. Is that something that you expect we'll see?
Yeah, the expectation is that boosters will become part of this series with COVID as well, just like our annual flu shots. The answer to say when will we see that, nobody really knows. That's really the main reason why we're seeing these clinical trials that are still underway and ongoing. As part of the emergency youth authorization that came through from Health Canada and the FDA. So we'll have to stand by and wait and see, but it's very likely in the future that we're going to see that. And I've heard some rumblings that the UK very soon will be announcing their booster schedule. So it wouldn't shock me if we know more in the next few weeks or months around that topic, but stay tuned.
So vaccines could very possibly be sort of a regular regimen that we have to explore through the remainder.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be just like our flu season.
Right. Okay. Interesting to know. Thank you. And another question that came in is around antibiotics. And actually, I've had a few people ask this question as well, just in regular conversation. So if you're taking antibiotics in and around the time, either pre or post your vaccine, does that have an impact?
So we don't think so. A good question though, because of some of those questions when you see the immune system and those kinds of things, you'll see varying things on the internet for sure. But taking an antibiotic has is not a contraindication at all of having one of these vaccines. The only contraindication we have, or the thing that we ask, is that you not have another vaccine in around that 2 to 4 week time, either before or after. And it's a little different depending on which province you go to, just because when you get one vaccine, your immune system is busy dealing with that. So we don't want to introduce another one. So, but antibiotics, definitely not a contraindication to getting the vaccine.
No, it's good. So it's kind of, yeah, it's a good time to you know, put the multitasking of your body on the back burner. Just focus on the one thing at a time, right? If possible.
Exactly.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's the questions that have come in for you, Dr. McKnight. So thank you once again for your time and that just wealth of information that you shared with us in this short period of time. And we certainly appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. As just a reminder to everybody, we are holding our GBTA convention in Orlando. So fingers crossed, borders will hopefully open up a little bit more, will allow for a little bit more free travel across the Canada-US border as we progress through to the fall. So November 17 to 19, our GBTA convention will be in Orlando, and registration is currently open for that. So if you are interested in attending, please, we encourage you to check it out on our website at gbta.org. There were a couple of questions that came in. I'll just address those right now about some of our plans for the fall for GBTA Canada. And I know one of the questions was, will we be holding the live Ready Safe Travel training program at any point in the fall? And we won't be doing it live as we did this past May. And that's why we've decided to hold the self-paced Ready Safe Travel training program, which will be exactly the same type of content, just available to register for and take on demand yourself. So you'll be able to download all of the content, review all of the PowerPoint decks, watch the videos, take the knowledge check quizzes, have access to all of the resource links, and be able to progress through the program. If it takes you a day, or if it takes you 3 days, if it takes you 3 months, you'll be able to take that on your own pace and time. And when you do have that program completed, you'll be able to submit your final results to GBTA for verification. And then we will issue the Ready Safe Travel certification, their certificates, and you'll become a Ready Safe Travel specialist. So that's one of the questions that came in. And lastly, the last question is in and around our fall programming. Yes, we've made so many announcements over the past year and a half about what our plans were. But just to be crystal clear, we are not holding a conference in Toronto nor a conference in Calgary, Western Canada, in the 2021 year. We are replacing all of that live in-person activity with the Ready Safe Travel workshop series, which will be the smaller one-day educational professional development workshops that will be, GBTA will run in one in Calgary, one in Vancouver, one in Toronto, and one in Montreal. So those will be replacing our live in-person programming that was originally scheduled. So just to make note of that. And again, more information and dates will be shared in the coming weeks as we get all of that put together. But we'd certainly look forward to welcoming you all in the various cities in the smaller, more appropriately sized capacities that will help us get back and ease back into meeting and traveling again. So thank you all so much for your time today and for joining our GBTA Canada Town Hall. Thank you to our speakers, Dr. Tammy McKnight and Jennifer Taylor. We certainly appreciate your valuable insights that you shared with our Canadian business travel and meetings industry here today. And we will be holding our town hall next again in the fall, but again, with the changes of the program and all the pivots that we're doing, stay tuned for our revised dates and revised programming, not only for the Ready Safe Travel Canada workshop series, but also for our town halls and some of our Canadian webinars that we will be juggling dates around to accommodate. So thank you all again for joining us. We are all in this together and we are moving through it together. It's a great supportive industry we have. And remember, get out and vote for our GBTA members. All right. Thank you guys. Take care and hope you have a great and safe day.